The date was February 20th, 1945. The sulfur-stained landscape of Yuma's northern sector was already choked with the black smoke of 2 days of brutal fighting, and the volcanic ash beneath Lieutenant Yamada's boots crunched like shattered glass as he peered through the narrow, concrete observation slit of Pillbox 247. A familiar, ominous silhouette emerged through the distant haze, an American Sherman tank. Olive drab paint, a common profile, the same machines that had been reduced to burning wreckage in the volcanic sand. Yet, as the morning sun cast long shadows, something felt profoundly different about this approaching vehicle. Yamada adjusted his field glasses, fixing on tank number 431, which moved with deliberate, almost unnatural caution, navigating the deep ash drifts that could swallow an infantryman to the knee. Inside the subterranean fortress that he and his men had labored to construct over the last year, the lieutenant permitted himself a flicker of confidence. This structure was a masterpiece of defensive engineering, designed to defy the might of the U.S. Navy. Its 4-foot-thick walls, reinforced with salvaged steel rods, were built to withstand direct impacts from 16-inch naval projectiles. Machine gun ports offered interlocking fields of fire, connecting to a vast hidden city below. This network, 11 miles long and descending 7 stories, was General Kuribayashi's final answer to the invasion. The general strategy was unfolding precisely as intended. Allow the Americans to land, let them concentrate their forces on the beaches, and then force them to pay for every inch of ground with mathematical precision. The doctrine was simple and uncompromising: 1 American casualty for every yard gained, and 10 American dead for every Japanese defender lost. The brutal calculus of close-quarters combat dictates survival. As the American armor, identified as Tank 431, closed the distance to a precarious 125 yards, Lieutenant Yamada felt a familiar tension. Yet, as the turret began its precise mechanical rotation toward his position, he registered a terrifying anomaly. Where the standard 75mm main armament should have been mounted, there was only a heavily modified barrel, a specialized nozzle. The sound preceded the devastation. It was not the expected thunderclap of a high-explosive round or the staccato chatter of coaxial machine guns, but an entirely new acoustic signature, a chilling, sustained mechanical hiss, indicative of compressed air escaping under immense pressure. Then came the horrifying visual confirmation. A thick torrent of burning liquid erupted from the American vehicle, arcing high across the volatile Pacific morning like a stream of liquid hellfire. The range was astonishing. This stream of napalm-thickened death stretched an impossible 150 yards, painting a blazing, inescapable line across the volcanic defenses. It struck the concrete aperture of the neighboring pillbox with clinical, devastating accuracy, splashing to the narrow machine gun port and flowing inward like true molten lava, seeking the lowest point of refuge. The resulting screams were terrifyingly brief. Yamada's field telephone immediately crackled with panicked, fractured reports from positions across the entire sector. Strange American tanks. Something different. They're burning us out. His hands trembled visibly as he gripped the receiver, forced to witness black, oily smoke pouring relentlessly from defensive positions that had been engineered to be impregnable. Inside Tank 431, Staff Sergeant Robert Meese's voice sliced through the cacophony of the engine and the roar of the flame. Gunner, traverse. Right 30 degrees. Next target, pillbox, fire. The defenders could not have known they were facing the secretive technological response of the Allied forces. A mere 8 modified Sherman tanks, covertly conceived and constructed by the ingenuity of the Navy Seabees. The grueling 20-hour shifts inside stifling Hawaiian warehouses were not simply building war machines. They were fundamentally reshaping the calculus of conflict. Who could have foreseen the advent of weapons that would turn Japan's most formidable defensive strength, the network of subterranean bunkers and fortified caves, into a catastrophic, inescapable crematorium? 5 months prior, the genesis of this terrifying capability was unfolding within a classified workshop at Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. The incessant sound of welding torches provided the only soundtrack to the tropical night, driving the 20-hour workday. Machinist mate First Class A. Riker paused, wiping a streak of grease and sweat from his forehead, as he meticulously examined the prototype CBH-1 flamethrower system being integrated into the turret of Sherman tank number 431. This very vehicle would soon sow terror in the heart of soldiers like Lieutenant Yamada. "We are not simply fabricating armament," Riker stated to his partner. "Electricians made second-class Joseph Kyle as molten sparks rained down around them. We are engineering the means to preserve marine lives." Their exhaustion was fueled by the devastating reports from Peleliu and Saipan, where thousands of infantry had perished attempting to breach concrete positions impervious to conventional artillery fire. The brutal mathematics of the Pacific Campaign drove their urgency. Portable flamethrower operators suffer a staggering 70% casualty rate, with some assault units reporting losses as high as 92%. These were young men carrying 70-pound fuel tanks, forced to approach hardened concrete fortifications at point-blank range, close enough for Japanese machine gunners to distinguish the whites of their eyes. Overseeing this desperate, vital project was Colonel George F. UNM, who paced vigilantly between the 8 Sherman tanks undergoing conversion within the vast, echoing warehouse. The creation of this highly specialized weapon demanded immense resources, 1,200 dedicated man-hours, and 150 precision machine components. The architect of this design, a veteran of 44 years of military service at the age of 64, understood profoundly that modern warfare is ultimately decided by technological innovation, not simply personal valor. His resulting CBH-1 system represented a synthesis of the finest elements derived from British, American, and even captured German flamethrower technology, creating a lethal mechanism unprecedented in its capabilities. This weapon could project napalm-thickened fuel across 150 yards with a precision usually associated only with a tank cannon. A visiting Marine officer was informed that the system operated at 300 pounds per square inch of pressure, triple the output of preceding designs, delivering a searing fuel mixture that burned at 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit. Critically, the system was fully integrated, capable of traversing a devastating 270 degrees and achieving elevation from -10 to a positive 35 degrees through the standard tank fire control mechanisms. Yet, the most profound innovation was psychological. These specialized Sherman tanks bore no unique markings. They were visually indistinguishable from standard armor until the precise moment they unleashed their terrible purpose, ensuring enemy observers were denied crucial advance warning. Just 8,000 meters distant, deep beneath the formidable slopes of Hill 382, General Kuribayashi stood in his command bunker. He meticulously studied maps overlaid with precise defensive calculations. For the entire year of 1944, his 21,000 dedicated defenders had engineered an underground empire, carving 1,500 fortified positions and connecting them with tunnels vast enough to shelter entire battalions within the volcanic rock. Every approach route was measured, and every potential kill zone was pre-registered with dedicated artillery spotters. Kuribayashi's standing order was absolute. Do not die until you have killed 10 Americans, demanding that every soldier maintain their position until completely overrun, only then resorting to close-quarters combat with grenades. The Japanese command strategy demanded absolute resistance, fighting with rifles, bayonets, and finally with bare hands. General Kuribayashi's mathematical calculation was as elegant as it was brutal. 21,000 entrenched defenders, inflicting 10 American casualties for every Japanese loss, with total 210,000 enemy deaths, a figure exceeding the entire planned invasion force. Even if the Americans successfully seized Iwo Jima, the anticipated catastrophic costs would compel them to abandon the subsequent invasion of the Japanese homeland. Japanese intelligence had meticulously analyzed every known American weapon system. They understood the limitations of the portable flamethrower, dangerous to its operator, severely restricted in range, and highly vulnerable to concentrated small arms fire. Consequently, specialized training focused intensely on anti-flamethrower tactics, targeting the distinctive twin-fuel tanks, rushing positions when the weapon reached its minimum range, and exploiting the operator's exposure during reloading. Yet, this extensive defensive planning rested on one fatal assumption, that flamethrowers would only be wielded by exposed infantry. The revolutionary concept of the armored flamethrower, tanks capable of approaching heavily fortified emplacements under protection of their own armor while delivering accurate, high-volume incendiary attacks at unprecedented range, was an innovation they had utterly failed to consider. Meanwhile, the grim reality of the defense settled upon individual soldiers. Near the base of Mount Suribachi, Private Takahashi Toshiharu, an engineer from Kochi Prefecture, crouched in a cramped spider hole. At 31, he had volunteered for the ultimate sacrifice, a suicide mission. Strapped to his back was a 20-kilogram demolition charge. His task was to infiltrate American tank positions under the cover of darkness and detonate himself against the enemy armor. He had already composed his final letter home, offering a profound apology to his wife and children for his failure to return alive. "There is no water, no bullets, no way I can live," he whispered to his 7 companions, each carrying an identical explosive pack. The Japanese defender, trained explicitly to counter the American armor thrust, relied on tactical manuals detailing the vulnerabilities of conventional armor. Takahashi knew the precise thickness of Sherman plating, the structural weak points within the track systems, and the crucial blind spots allowing a determined soldier to approach undetected with satchel explosive charges. Yet his intensive training provided no doctrine for confronting the M4 A3R3, a terrifying weapon capable of projecting liquid death across 150 yards, a capability that instantly nullified the Japanese defensive advantage, transforming entrenched positions into inescapable killing grounds. On the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima, Staff Sergeant Robert Misa checked his watch as Tank 431 idled. Blending seamlessly into the formation, the 8 M4 A3R3 flamethrower tanks sat among the regular Shermans, their terrible secret cloaked until precise moment of engagement. Misa's specialized crew, Driver Private James Morrison, Assistant Driver Private Robert Chin, Loader Corporal Anthony Vitelli, and Gunner Corporal Thomas Carlson, represented months of intense preparation on equipment entirely untested in the crucible of combat. Misa's voice crackled over the intercom. "Surprise is our only advantage. We look like every other Sherman until we fire. After that, every Japanese gun on this island will be aimed at us." Through his periscope, the terrible cost of the initial assault was visible. Marines were falling by the hundreds, stalled against the invisible, interlocking Japanese defenses. Conventional tactical doctrine had failed catastrophically. Naval gunfire could not penetrate the network of bunkers buried under 10 feet of volcanic rock, and heavy artillery shells exploded harmlessly against positions specifically engineered to withstand direct hits from battleship ordnance. The first day's casualties were staggering. Hundreds of Marines killed or wounded for the minimal gain of less than 700 yards of territory. Could the deployment of 8 specialized tanks fundamentally alter the trajectory of the battle? At precisely 1,420 hours on February 20th, 1945, a ferocious sound shattered the unnatural volcanic silence gripping Iwo Jima's northern sector. Inside the heavily armor-hulled Tank 431, the crew initiated the attack with lethal mechanical precision. Following the command, gunner, flamethrower, pillbox fire, Corporal Thomas Carlson's finger to press the trigger, and the integrated CBH-1 flamethrower system immediately unleashed its terrible force. Driven by compressed nitrogen operating at 300 pounds per square inch, a devastating stream of napalm-thickened fuel oil was propelled in a perfect, lethal arc across the Pacific morning. The burning liquid struck the concrete pillbox aperture with surgical accuracy, breaching the machine gun port and flowing inward. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. Like a torrent of molten lava, the liquid fire sought every corner and concealed position within the bunker complex. Lieutenant Yamada, positioned in an observation post barely 200 yards away, watched in paralyzed horror as the temperatures inside the neighboring structures soared past 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit in mere seconds. The rapid consumption of oxygen meant that Japanese defenders often suffocated before the advancing flames could reach them. Those few soldiers who survived the initial inferno attempted frantic escapes through rear exits, only to find that the liquid fire had flowed through ventilation shafts, effectively transforming their meticulously constructed subterranean fortress into a functional crematorium. "My God," whispered Private Morrison, the tank's driver, as the brief, terrible screams of the trapped men cut sharply through the morning air, ending almost as quickly as they began. Reflection, however, was a luxury they could not afford. Japanese anti-tank guns had already confirmed their location and were preparing to fire. The immediate threat materialized as a 47mm anti-tank projectile slammed into Tank 431's frontal plate. The impact was deafening, the sound of steel ringing against steel, often described as the world's largest hammer striking an anvil. The Sherman shuddered violently, but the shot, miraculously, merely ricocheted skyward. The armor held. Commander Meza, his voice steady amid the chaos, issued a precise command. Traverse right 30 degrees. The gunner, Skox, initiated a continuous flame burst. Carlson maintained the searing inferno for a grueling 15 seconds until thick, acrid black smoke poured from every defensive aperture of the Japanese fortification. What followed was a spectacle unprecedented in 3 years of brutal Pacific warfare. Through the sulphurous haze, American eyes witnessed Japanese troops emerging, not in an organized retreat or suicidal charge, but in outright panic flight. Disbelief crackled across the lines. "They're running," reported Chun from his bow machine gun position. "They're actually running away." Radio communications across the Marine network exploded with confirmation. The flame tanks were fully operational, neutralizing entrenched positions without the devastating cost of a direct infantry assault. Near the East Boat Basin, Tank 434, supporting the 23rd Marines, pioneered new doctrine. Crew Commander Sergeant William Patterson developed a highly effective corkscrew and burn tactics, approaching a tight spiral pattern to negate anti-tank fire while delivering relentless flame suppression. In a single afternoon, for 134 raced for fortified positions that had successfully stalled an entire battalion's progress for 48 hours. Yet, it was a dramatic display by Tank 432 near the slopes of Mount Suribachi that truly crystallized the weapon's profound psychological dominion over the enemy. Patterson, commanding a specialized Sherman, directed his driver to halt precisely 100 yards short of the massive, interconnected cave complex. Within the shadowy recesses, dozens of entrenched Japanese soldiers waited. Through the magnification of his periscope, Patterson observed their eyes, small, reflective points of light, unnervingly similar to trapped creatures caught in a sudden glare. He did not aim at the enemy positions. Instead, he triggered a brief, searing burst of liquid fire high into the air, a terrifying demonstration of destructive potential. The result was instantaneous and historically unprecedented. Across the defensive line, Japanese soldiers began a chaotic flight toward rear exits, abandoning fortified positions they had been explicitly ordered to defend to the death. These were veterans hardened by the Sino-Japanese War, men whose fundamental training dictated that death was the only honorable alternative to surrender. Yet, the sheer visceral terror of incineration superseded the rigid code of the warrior. Marine riflemen, prepositioned to exploit the expected moment of breakthrough, were so stunned by the sudden rout that their initial response was delayed, failing to immediately engage the retreating enemy. Within just 30 minutes, an entire defensive sector had been neutralized without the tank having fired a single direct round. Meanwhile, Private Takahashi Toshiharu crouched in his spider hole, the heavy, improvised suicide bomb strapped across his back. His tactical manual had prepared him for this precise calculus. Wait for the Sherman to close to 10 meters, then rush forward with the explosive charge. One Japanese life traded for one American tank. But as Tank 437 closed to 50 meters, the impossible occurred. The turret swung not toward its position, but toward a distant bunker 80 yards to Takahashi's left, and a dense torrent of liquid fire erupted violently from the aperture where the main gun should have been. The napalm, delivered with terrifying precision, arced through the air like a flaming torrent, finding every fissure and aperture in the reinforced bunker. The resulting screams were a sound of sheer, protracted horror, distinct from the swift finality of shrapnel or bullets. This was a prolonged agony of men incinerated within their own earthen fortress. The combatant later documented the horrific efficacy of the weapon in his journal. "The enemy was burned out with a flamethrower," he wrote. "The flame is dark with black smoke. I could not see even an inch ahead because the first tank was done. The enemy must have been angry. The second tank is headed for us and shoots with a cannon, and dashing with machine gun. Awesome." The focus narrowed to Takahashi, concealed in his spider hole, watching Tank 437 lumber closer, closing the distance to 30 meters. This precise range, specified in his training manuals, marked the optimal window for a successful suicide attack. Yet, as he prepared to spring from cover, the tactical landscape abruptly shifted. He watched the crew commander's periscope tracking back and forth, searching for targets, until the tank's turret swung a full 180 degrees and fired directly behind itself, instantly incinerating a squad of Japanese soldiers attempting their own rear suicide charge. This devastating maneuver demonstrated that the tactical revolution was complete. Unlike conventional tanks, the CBH-1's full traverse capability allowed it to engage targets in any direction, transforming a weapon once limited by restrictive fields of fire into a machine capable of projecting a complete circle of death around its perimeter. Takahashi remained paralyzed, frozen in disbelief, as the tank passed directly overhead, the overwhelming weight of 35 tons compressing the volcanic ash surrounding his hiding place. Through the earth itself, he could feel the terrifying, visceral rumble of the Sherman's engine and the relentless vibration of its tracks. The sound of the machine had fundamentally redefined the calculus of ground combat. A surviving correspondent noted the bizarre reality of the situation. "There are strange things and miracles in the world," he writes. Asterisk, "It is a miracle that I am now writing such things at a time like this. It is surprising." Asterisk, by nightfall on February 20th. The emerging operational data presented a brutal narrative that would irrevocably reshape Marine Corps doctrine forever. The metrics were staggering. 8 specialized tanks had eradicated 47 fortified positions in a single day. In sectors supported by these flame units, Marine casualties plummeted by 40% compared to the previous day's horrific losses. Furthermore, 600 yards of essential territory were secured in areas that had remained static and unyielding for the prior 48 hours. Yet, the most profound statistic was purely psychological. For the first time in the history of the Imperial Japanese military, measurable numbers of soldiers were abandoning their posts rather than adhering to the traditional mandate of dying at their stations. Deep beneath Hill 382, General Kuribayashi monitored the disaster from his subterranean command bunker. The reports reaching him shattered his meticulously calculated defensive mathematics. Positions engineered to withstand weeks of siege were now collapsing within hours. The underground fortress, once deemed impregnable, had become a pressurized death trap, with gouts of liquid fire flowing through ventilation shafts and tunnel connections like molten rivers seeking the lowest ground. That night, Kuribayashi issued desperate emergency orders, designating the flame tanks as priority targets for all available 47mm anti-tank guns. Volunteer special assault teams were hastily organized, prepared to charge with explosive satchel charges strapped to their bodies. But the fundamental tactical problem remained insurmountable. The devastating flamethrower tanks looked structurally identical to the tactical profile of the specialized tanks mirrored that of regular Shermans, granting Japanese defenders only a fleeting moment of recognition before the torrent of flame erupted. By then, effective resistance was impossible. This terrifying shift was immediately captured in enemy transmissions. Near the beach, radio operator Corporal James Martinez monitored an intelligence post, picking up frantic, broken code communications. The enemy reported a new American weapon impossible to counter, describing how liquid fire flows like water and turned their entrenched positions into crematoriums. This chilling intelligence confirmed what Marine commanders were witnessing firsthand. The intricate Japanese defensive doctrine, refined over centuries of warfare, was collapsing under a system secretly developed by Navy Seabees working relentless 24-hour shifts in a secluded Hawaiian warehouse. Tank 431, its thick armor now scarred with fresh dents and burn marks from near misses, idled behind a destroyed Japanese pillbox as Sergeant Mesa surveyed the transformed landscape. Smoke billowed from a dozen fortifications that had seemed impregnable that morning. Marine infantry advanced rapidly in the wake of the flame tanks, crossing ground that had caused hundreds of casualties just hours before. "We did what we had to do," Mesa would confide to his grandson decades later. "Those tanks saved a lot of Marine lives. That's what I try to remember." 40 years after that brutal February morning, a moment of fraught historical confrontation occurred on Iwo Jima's black volcanic sand, where Tank 431 first opened fire. Former Staff Sergeant Robert Mesa, then 73 with noticeably trembling hands, faced former Lieutenant Koshi Yamada, who had witnessed that initial flame tank attack from inside his concrete bunker. "I hated you for 40 years," Yamada said through an interpreter, his voice barely audible above the relentless Pacific wind. "The flame tanks kill my friends." In the shadow of Mount Suribachi, the volcanic peak where Marines had famously raised a flag, two veterans stood in silent acknowledgement. Their embrace transcended mere personal healing. It was a profound recognition of the transformative horror they had mutually endured. Mesa's simple observation that they were all just boys trying to survive underscored the terrible context of a battle where their unit, spearheaded by Tank 431, pioneered a terrifying new form of warfare on the very day the iconic flag was raised. This reconciliation acknowledged the seismic shift engineered by 8 modified Sherman tanks. The statistical impact of these specialized units remained staggering, even when measured against the brutality of modern conflict. Over 36 days of relentless combat, these 8 flamethrower tanks consumed an estimated 360,000 gallons of napalm-thickened fuel. Their devastating efficiency destroyed more than 1,000 fortified Japanese positions and, critically, reduced projected American casualties by an estimated 5,000 men. This technological innovation broke the entrenched deadlock of what could have been a months-long siege, proving that mechanized fire could overcome even the most fanatical subterranean resistance. Yet, the tactical victory was purchased at an immense personal price that haunted the crews involved. Tank operators reported severe, enduring psychological trauma stemming from their role in what witnesses described as industrial-scale incineration. Corporal Thomas Carlson, the gunner who unleashed that first torrent of fire, testified years later to the indelible auditory and olfactory memories. "You could hear them screaming when the flame hit. Not for long, but you heard it." He confessed that the sound still returned sometimes at night, inextricably linked to the unforgettable stench. Burning flesh mingled with the acrid sulfur of the volcanic rock. The revolution extended. The devastating effectiveness of the flamethrower tanks extended far beyond the fighting at Iwo Jima. Recognizing this essential capability, the Marine Corps immediately requested 54 additional units for subsequent operations. Under the extreme urgency of an AAA priority, the same level of national mobilization assigned to clandestine Manhattan Project, Colonel George UNM's dedicated team at Schofield Barracks rapidly developed the improved CBH-2 model. By June 1945, 70 new flame tanks were prepared for Operation Downfall, the massive planned invasion of the Japanese home islands. The improvised weapon had rapidly become standard equipment across the entire Pacific theater. During the brutal Battle of Okinawa, the scale of deployment became clear. Army flame tanks consumed 200,000 gallons of fuel mixture, proving devastatingly effective against entrenched Japanese cave complexes. Yet, the CBS personnel who engineered these critical machines, machinist mate Riker and electrician's mate Kill, returned civilian life after the war, their names forgotten in all but obscure technical reports, despite their innovations saving thousands of American lives. General Kuribayashi's final assessment, transmitted just before his death in late March 1945, proved remarkably prescient. Kuribayashi stated that the Americans had triumphed not just with superior numbers or firepower, but with superior imagination, systematically transforming Japan's greatest strength, the underground fortifications, into inescapable death traps. His prediction that future wars will belong to nations that could imagine new forms of warfare, not those who perfect old ones, remains a governing principle of military thought today, confirming that technological innovation, from precision-guided munitions to cyber warfare, consistently defeats traditional tactics. The ultimate counter to fortified entrenchment was a terrifying synthesis of technology and brute force. Today, the physical embodiment of that desperate ingenuity, Tank 434, the last survivor of the original 8 specialized flame tanks, rests in silent vigil at the National Museum of the Marine Corps in Quantico, Virginia. Its heavily scarred armor, etched by volcanic rock and the relentless impact of enemy shells, serves as a visceral testament to a weapon that irrevocably altered the calculus of Pacific combat. While the small accompanying plaque dutifully chronicles technical specifications and battle history, it fails entirely to convey the raw, sensory experience. The sharp hiss of compressed nitrogen releasing, the blinding, liquid fire arcing across the stark Iwo Jima mornings, or the horrifying efficiency which deep underground fortresses were transformed into inescapable crematoriums. Veterans of that brutal campaign often spend the longest time before this exhibit, some offering a sharp salute, others simply lost in a silent, profound remembrance. The uncomfortable question posed by visiting school children, why would men devise such a horrific instrument of war? Finds its answer not in the glorification of conflict, but in the cold recognition of war's terrible necessities and the exceptional courage of the young crews who wielded these machines to preserve the lives of their fellow Marines. The final official gathering of Iwo Jima flame tank veterans occurred in 2015, attended by merely 3 surviving crew members, all then in their 90s. They convened here at the museum, urgently sharing fading memories with historians desperate to record these critical first-hand accounts before they vanished entirely. This age of the close-quarters warrior was concluded in a conflagration on a small volcanic island. It signaled the dawn of technological warfare, a legacy that continues to resonate wherever American industrial might meets battlefield desperation, transforming the seemingly impossible into the chillingly inevitable.